Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books Presents Online, award-winning director Ken Kwapis, who will discuss his new book, But What I Really Want to Do is Direct, Lessons from a Life Behind the Camera in conversation with Executive Director of Cinema St. Louis, Cliff Froehlich. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years this year. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Ken and Cliff, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted to the current situation and are still bringing you the things that you love the most about Left Bank Books. And you can do curbside pickup or delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and make the world a better place. And we hope that you enjoy this event and hope that you support Ken Kwapis and Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for any of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep this event series going. It allows us to keep our bookstore and staff here through the most unusual of times, and it gets you a fantastic book to read. So we thank you so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience at the end of the event, so you can type those up as they come to your mind, whenever you would like throughout the course of the event, and we will get to those at the end. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. For over 3 decades, director Ken Kwapis has charted a career full of exceptional movies and television, from seminal shows like The Office to beloved films like He's Just Not That Into You. He is among the most respected directors in show business, but getting there wasn't easy. He struggled just like everyone else. With each triumph came the occasional faceplant. Using his background and inside knowledge, but what I really want to do is direct, tackles Hollywood myths through Ken's highly entertaining experiences. It's a roller coaster ride fueled by brawls with the top brass, clashes over budgets, and the passion that makes it all worthwhile. This humorous and refreshing personal memoir is filled with inspiring instruction, behind-the-scenes hilarity, and unabashed joy. It's a celebration of the director's craft and what it takes to succeed in show business on your own terms. And I will read a few of the blurbs. Jenna Fisher, who is also from St. Louis, says, Ken Kwapis also brought out the best in the actors, always brought out the best in the actors on The Office. Whenever Ken was directing, I always felt safe to go out on a limb and take chances, knowing he had my back. Every aspiring director should read this book. I can think of several professional directors that should read it too. Brian Cranston says, in the years that I was fortunate to work with Ken on Malcolm in the Middle, he had an uncanny ability to guide actors right to the heart of a scene and reveal its truths. He admits that he doesn't have all the answers, but he makes mistakes, and at times he'll struggle. But as he says in the book, it's the struggle to get it right that makes us human. And Larry Wilmore says, action is what most directors bark out to begin a scene, but Ken Kwapis starts by gently intoning the words, go ahead. That simple suggestion assures everyone they're in smart, capable, humble hands. That's how you'll feel reading this book. And so if you're anxious to discover how a top director always brings humor, honesty, and humanity to his work, all I can tell you is go ahead. Ken Kwapis is an award-winning director of motion pictures and television. He's directed 11 feature films, among them A Walk in the Woods, He's Just Not That Into You, and The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. For television, Kwapis helped launch 9 series, including the groundbreaking HBO comedy The Larry Sanders Show, Fox's Emmy Award-winning The Bernie Mac Show, and NBC's The Office. Kwapis studied filmmaking at Northwestern University and the University of Southern California. But What I Really Want to Do is Direct is his first book. And Cliff Froehlich, who he will be in conversation tonight, is the executive director of the nonprofit Cinema St. Louis. Cliff began his second tenure with the organization in January 2006. He previously served in the same position from April 2001 to March 2003. Between his stints at Cinema St. Louis, Froehlich worked as the arts and entertainment editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a variety of editorial positions at the Riverfront Times, and managing editor of St. Louis Magazine. He continues to write for local publications on a freelance basis, including film reviews for the RFT in book reviews for The Post. Since 1984, Froehlich has served as an adjunct faculty member at Webster University, teaching courses in film history and criticism. And now that I have read their incredible biographies, and I would love to have you all at home help me welcome Ken and Cliff for Left Bank Books. And if you could give a hearty round of applause welcoming so that they can hear to wherever they are in the country.
It's deafening. It's deafening. All right, let's begin, Ken, with a little reading. I'll obviously be getting to our questions momentarily, but you want to read a little bit of from the book that actually references the St. Louis area, not St. Louis proper, but rather where you grew up in Belleville, Illinois. So let's begin with that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let me just say one quick thing. So there are several chapters in the book that focus on films that had a big impact on me. Actually, specifically, individual shots from films that had a big impact on me. And this is the very beginning of a chapter about the film Lawrence of Arabia that I'm reading partly as a tribute to an important movie theater in my childhood, one that's still going and thriving. The chapter is called Who Are You? The best landscape a director can photograph is the face of a character in turmoil. I wish I could take credit for that line, but it's not mine, and I have no clue who coined it. There's one particular close-up of a man in duress I want to explore. It's a powerful, haunting shot. It's also enigmatic. It poses a question that, depending on your point of view, may or may not get answered by the end of the story. This close-up occupies a privileged position in my pantheon of favorite shots, but to get there, we need to take a circuitous route by way of the Skyview Drive-In in Belleville, Illinois, the site of many formative movie-going experiences. Now, the Skyview was, I guess it still is, was an open-air temple of the cinema. It boasted a marquee with a neon rocket ship that offered the promise that a movie could transport you to another realm. The Skyview opened in 1949, and a tornado destroyed the screen in 1955, lending the drive-in a mythic aura in my young mind. The first film I saw there was King Kong vs. Godzilla, directed by Ishiro Honda. The final bout between the titular monsters takes place atop Mount Fuji. At first, Godzilla seems to have the upper hand, or claw, I suppose, but Kong manages to rally, and the brawling duo tumbles off a cliff into the Pacific. At this point, the rumble resumes underwater. Only Kong emerges, but a Japanese military spokesman suspects that Godzilla survived the apes' pummeling and will return. Now, to be honest, I don't recall any of this, not because it's been half a century since I saw the film, rather because I spent most of King Kong vs. Godzilla's 97-minute running time hiding under the dashboard of my father's Thunderbird in a state of abject terror. What can I say? I was an impressionable viewer. Now, 2 years later, my father took me to the Skyview for what turned out to be a pivotal movie night. This time, I did not take refuge under the glove box. Indeed, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen for a moment, and thereafter became obsessed with the story's hero, Thomas Edward Lawrence. The film was Lawrence of Arabia. The Skyview was not the ideal venue for appreciating David Lean's epic. For starters, it was midsummer, and the sky was still bright when the film began. To entertain youngsters before showtime, the Skyview offered a playground with pony rides, a miniature train, and a small Ferris wheel. There was also a hayride that circled the perimeter of the grounds. Because of the long twilight, the playground was still packed when the Columbia Pictures logo appeared. On top of that, Maurice Jarre, that's the composer, Maurice Jarre's sumptuous score sounded pretty thin coming through those unwieldy metal speakers. You had to crack your window a tad to hang the speaker, which meant you got an earful of those noisy kids, squeaky swings, and that belching tractor pulling the hay wagon. In the car next door was a teenage couple with absolutely no interest in the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. To make matters worse, the Skyview screen could not quite accommodate the film's 2.20 to 1 aspect ratio. I distinctly recall shots in which there was nothing on screen but desert and two noses poking into either side of frame. Yet with all these impediments, I didn't stir for nearly 200 minutes. I didn't feel like I was watching a movie. I was simply there in the Arabian desert alongside this compelling, if curious, hero. And for days after seeing the film, I strutted about, emulating his peculiar swagger. Now, my childhood home abutted a thick woods. A short hike led to a clearing, a couple of acres stripped of trees, the future site of a new subdivision. Bulldozers were haphazardly parked, poised to excavate a basement or two. Huge mounds of dirt were everywhere. This was my Arabian desert, the perfect location to reenact scenes from Lawrence. Absconding with a white sheet from the family linen closet, I fought through the thicket and emerged on the dusty tract. Selecting a stick, approximately the length of the scimitar gifted to Lawrence by Sheriff Ali, I tied the sheet around my neck and pranced through the dirt, mangling whatever dialogue from the film I could recall. "Nothing is written," I announced, to no one in particular. Running to the top of a mound, I yelled, "I shall be at Aqaba." Then running down, I gave a war whoop and screamed, "No prisoners! No prisoners!" After an hour or so of skewering imaginary Turks, I trundled home, desperately in need of a Mountain Dew. Routing those Ottomans could really build up a thirst. I cracked myself up.
Well, I think that gives a wonderful taste of what people are going to encounter when they buy your book, Ken. Before we get into the questioning, I wanted to offer my own thoughts briefly about the book. I shared those with you right before we came on air, but I wanted to very much endorse the book. I just finished it. I wanted it to be fresh in my mind when we conversed. And as I told Ken, the really wonderful aspect of this is the way in which, and you saw an example right there, the way in which he weaves his personal experiences, both as a child in some instances, as a high school student, as a college student, but primarily from your own career, into a very practical how-to manual for directing, done in layman's language that you're able to grasp even if you have no real background in film. You probably aren't going to become a director, but the book will also illuminate for you, one, what the director does. You'll have much more appreciation for what they do in the course of making a movie, but it also, because Ken is a really terrific critic as well as being a great director, he's going to really illuminate a lot of different films that he's using as examples. And it's also funny. I said that I had a couple of loud belly laughs that issued forth unbidden while reading the book, and that doesn't happen too frequently. So I cannot emphasize enough that this is a book for everyone. It's not just for somebody who is going to be a would-be director, although it will be invaluable if you do have those ambitions. And for that matter, last, before we get to our questions, it's just a really good insight into how you lead, how you actually muster people and inspire them, and do it without with respecting them, without instilling fear, without creating upset, but instead leading by example and giving everybody an opportunity to weigh in, but still being fully in charge. So well done, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was my capsule review. All right, so so let's get to it. Let's start first. We'll get into the book proper, but I thought it'd be good for you to sort of position yourself, and you've done it a little bit already by that reading, but where you came from here in St. Louis, where you grew up, where you went to high school, of course, highly key. So,
well, I grew up in Belleville. I was born in East St. Louis. I grew up in Belleville. I went to St. Louis University High School. I would say that all of my formative movie-going experiences were in Belleville or St. Louis, and many, I'm happy to say, many of those theaters still exist. I don't want to go into we could talk for an hour just about my favorite theaters, but and after that, I traveled north to Chicago and studied at Northwestern. I then went to Los Angeles and did graduate work in filmmaking at USC. I didn't finish my degree because I got a job. I'll stop there. That's the cliffhanger. I can talk about my first job interview.
That's a great. That's actually a wonderful anecdote in the book too. So please.
No, the first thing I directed as a professional was an episode of what was called the CBS Afternoon Playhouse. This was CBS's answer to the then very popular ABC After School Special, short films playing in the afternoon for young people. So I got a job doing one of those, but to get the job, I had to interview with the executive producer of the show, and that person was none other than Bob Keeshan, known to most people or known to many people of a certain age as Captain Kangaroo. So my first job interview was with Captain Kangaroo, and I was a nervous wreck because, well, it was my first job interview. But in the middle of the interview, I got the sense that Captain Kangaroo, I'll call him Captain Kangaroo, I'll call him the captain. How about that? In the middle of the interview, I got a sense that the captain really had run out of questions to ask. So he after a pause, he said, "So Ken, how were your grades in school?" And I froze because, in fact, not only did I not complete my degree, I left a number of classes incomplete. They would no doubt be converted to Fs at some point. And I thought, oh my God, the captain is going to like call my college and get a transcript. And so I lied. I lied about my grades. And to this day, I can't believe that I lied to Captain Kangaroo. But he gave me the job. So.
And you are correct. Those of us of a certain age have very fond memories of the captain and Mr. Green Jeans and Grandfather Clock, etc. The whole stable of characters, and that was appropriate. So yeah, again, those sorts of stories are peppered throughout the book, but they always make a larger point about what you have learned, first of all, through your experience and how you can apply it, somebody who's reading it, to their own experience as they move into a directorial career, if they move in that direction.
Well, that anecdote is part of a chapter about how to take a meeting, and I would say that a lot of that chapter is devoted to like terrible meetings that I've had. I mean, they're funny, but they're terrible. But I do offer a couple of, I think, good pieces of advice about just based on things I've done that worked out well in a meeting. I'll just mention them real quickly. One of the things I often do when I meet to direct a new series or a feature film is I try and figure out what my perceived weakness is and hit it head on. So just to give you an example, when I got the job, when I met with the producer of the film, The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, I started the interview by saying, I'm not a teenage girl. And I'm not part of the demographic that this film is aimed at. So because I knew that the producer was thinking, why are we hiring this, then 40-ish guy to direct this film? And so, I mean, after that, I went into great detail about how passionate I was about the story, but I wanted to lead off again I wanted to let them know I knew what they thought my weak point was in this, and I wanted to hit it head on. So.
Let's loop back a little bit to your time here in St. Louis. So I'm sure folks are going to be interested in how you became sort of infatuated with film. You talk a little bit about it again in that chapter. Those early experiences at the drive-in obviously to some degree set you on your path. But what were the main turning points as far as, okay, now this is something I want to pursue as an actual career? And I do know you made some films as early as high school. Maybe you did some in grade school. I don't know.
My parents gave me a Super 8 camera in grade school. I think maybe I was in the 7th grade. And I think like the day after they gave it to me, I broke it. Here's how I broke it. We had a pool table in our house, and I sort of put the camera, I sort of propped it up on the cushion rather, and I wanted to do like a stop action movie of like the pool balls moving of their own, under their own volition. I seem to recall thinking this was the most radical idea. No one had ever done anything quite like this. And in excitement, I elbowed the camera off the table, and it landed on the floor with a crack. So what happened after that is after we had to we took the camera, my father and I took the camera to a local photo store where it was repaired. It took a couple of weeks to fix the camera. And it was during that time I remember going to the public library and just curious to see let's find some books about directing. And frankly, there were none. There were books about individual directors, but there wasn't anything, really about the day-to-day life of a working director. That's part of what inspired me to do this, by the way, because I don't think there are many books out there like this still. But I would say that my first Super 8 camera, which I promptly broke, was an important start on the road.
And what about specific films? You already mentioned Lawrence of Arabia, which you go into much greater detail, obviously, later in that chapter about why it was so key and central to your own development. But and I know you have a huge fondness. You begin the book essentially with American Graffiti, but can you just name check a few key points in which I'm interested, but this is now a path that I want to pursue seriously?
I mean, I don't write about this in the book, but I think, the year 1968 was sort of critical for me. And also, what a fantastic year in terms of movies that came out. And in addition to some of the more obvious ones like 2001, I was really enamored with the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I'm very happy to say decades later, I got to direct the Sundance Kid in a film. But I do remember even as a kid, getting a sense that there was somebody who was in charge of the storytelling. I mean, it's a very stylish film. I haven't seen it for a long time, but I just remember there were choices that were made, and they had to be made by some person. They weren't just random, but it always felt to me like there's, you were comfortable because someone was behind the wheel of the car, as it were. And that was a key film. That film kind of awakened in me this idea. There's somebody who actually puts this together. So that was a big one for me.
I'm glad you brought that particular film up too, because I failed to mention it in my brief capsule review of the book. But I think your book is going to deserve a place on the shelf next to William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade, which is from a screenwriter's perspective, and he's the person who wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, as well as All the President's Men, Marathon Man, and any number of others. The Princess Bride, many people's favorites, among many people's favorites. That was a terrific book that gave great insight, and again, in a way that anyone as a reader would be able to understand exactly what transpires sort of behind that curtain of Hollywood.
I'd love to talk about film and television for a second, because the one of the things that and now I'm jumping ahead to the early 1980s, but when I got out of film school, I mean, I was, what's the right way to put this? Like a lot of my peers, I had a bias against television directing. And I wanted to be a feature filmmaker. And when I got out of school, the general feeling among my peers was, if you were a feature director, why would you possibly want to, go into television? And if you were a television director, well, good luck getting into features. And now things have changed 100%. But it's interesting that at that time, when I started as a professional, there was still, I think, quite a bias against TV. But anyways, I just wanted to jump in about.
Well, and that's actually, I think, a really important point, because your career is somewhat unique in the sense that you toggled back and forth much earlier. Now it's common. Feature filmmakers very freely migrate to television, and there's still, I think, much more of an impediment for people who start exclusively in television to make that leap into feature filmmaking. But you have moved back and forth throughout your career, and I think you were somewhat unique at the time you started in that from that perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, you asked about turning points. I would say, in that regard, a huge turning point for me came in the early 1990s. I had just finished, I just released a film, the film He Said, She Said, which I directed with my now wife, Marissa Silver. And I was struggling to try and get another feature project off the ground when I was sent the script for a half-hour television comedy. And I remember, because I was still, a bit of a snob, I didn't even want to read it. well, I thought, oh my gosh, the slippery slope. If I, like no one will take me seriously as a feature director. And finally I thought, what the hell, let's see what it is. Well, it was the pilot of the Larry Sanders Show. And which was written by Gary Shandling and Dennis Klein. And I read it and I was astonished because it was not only unlike anything I'd seen on television, it was frankly unlike anything that was playing in a movie theater. It felt like these two people were reinventing the game. And I'm so thrilled that I was part of launching that show because it I think has since, people now see it as it was a real harbinger of a whole, sort of new wave of kind of tonally complicated half-hour shows that, I would say that everything from Fleabag to Atlanta to, there's so many shows that I think have so broadened the idea of what a half-hour storytelling is on television. I'd like to think you can trace a line back to Larry Sanders. So.
To return briefly to, and we could talk the entire hour, as you pointed out, about many aspects of
Sure.
the things that we're lighting on briefly. Larry Sanders I absolutely adore that show, and I would love to unpack it further. But let's go back a little bit to the beginning of your career. You noted the fact that you actually left school because you got a job. Now, that is rare. That you actually managed to get a foothold in the business as a director, leaping directly into the director's seat, not sort of working your way up the chain before you had even graduated. Talk a little bit about how that occurred. What was the mechanism that allowed you to get in front of the captain in order to pitch yourself as a filmmaker?
Well, part of it was I directed a film at USC that was noteworthy. It won some student film awards. I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly how the interview came about, but the thing that's important to me is that I remember some of my filmmaking peers, wanted to hold out until they could get a feature off the ground or get a job directing a feature, and I kind of jumped at the chance to direct something that, quite frankly, was kind of low on the cultural totem pole, something that was, that super under the radar. And if there was a lesson to learn from that, I think that, you do not know, when you go through the door where it's going to lead or who you're going to meet. And so for me, again, I'm not answering your question about how it happened, but I think the important thing about it is I was not afraid to jump in and direct something that was not, I wasn't directing an art film at the top of my career. I was directing a children's television show. Yeah.
Which then helped get you your first feature film by
Absolutely.
having that experience in Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird.
Yeah, and I'm still to this day so grateful that I was able to work with people like Jim Henson and Carol Spinney. And by the way, going back to tips on how to take a meeting, one of the other things I talk about is never to be, it's always good in a job interview to occasionally say what you don't know. And when I met Jim Henson to get the job to direct Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird, quickly into the meeting, I just took a chance and I said, Jim, I have no idea how to direct a puppet. I've never directed a puppet. And the meeting could have gone off the rails at that point, but instead Jim said, you know what, just talk to the puppeteers like they're actors. And we got into this very wonderful conversation about treating puppeteers like actors. And so I think that, again, I'm just looping back to this chapter about how to take a meeting, but I think sometimes it's not saying what you don't know is a real strength. So, and by the way, I Follow That Bird was such a big film for me on many levels. By the way, when it came out, almost nobody saw it. It was not a film that made much of a dent at the box office, but it has since had a wonderful afterlife. But for me, one of the takeaways from it had to do with character and character development. And you might say, what? You worked with the Muppets and the big takeaway was that you learned something about character. Well, one of the great things about the Muppet characters is that they have such clearly defined drives. I mean, Cookie Monster does not want anything but cookies. So, and it seems silly, but over the years, I've read and directed many characters and scenes where the characters are just unfocused and flabby, and there's no sense of what's driving them. And the Muppets, what drives them is so clean and so clear and so sharp. And again, with a related note, with working with Carol Spinney, who played Big Bird. At first, Big Bird for me was like an object that I needed to figure out how to frame properly. I mean, by the way, it's not an easy thing to figure out how to compose shots with an 8-foot bird. And it took a while. I was well into the production before I started to think of Big Bird as a subject, not an object. And I started to tune into the emotional content of that story. And again, this seems kind of funny, talking about Big Bird and you're talking about the emotional content. Well, it's actually a story with a very, very profound plot. I mean, it's really a story about leaving home to find home. It's a story about finding your own people. And I think what, for me, the big takeaway from working on that film was I started looking at scenes from the inside out, as opposed to like, oh, just where do I put the camera? And ironically, this is, as I say in the book, it took an 8-foot bird to, teach me that, part of my job as a director was to be a good student of human nature. So
I had a question for you, and then we're going to be opening things up in the not too distant future here to audience questions. We'll be rejoined for that. But I was curious, you name check, you go into great detail about many of the films as far as offering specific examples from the films that you directed as, to illuminate points that you want to bring home. The one that you actually don't ever mention, even in passing, and I found this a little curious, was Sexual Life, which is the one film you wrote. Was that a conscious decision, or did it fall on the cutting room floor, so to speak?
No,
I'm just curious.
No, I definitely wrote a chapter about it. I wasn't quite happy enough with it. And to be honest, I want to reapproach it in a slightly bigger form, because it was a very special project for me. It is the only film I've written. And it was a wonderful experience, and I'm also happy to say it's a film of mine that played at the St. Louis Film Festival.
One of several. Mm-hmm. He Said, She Said, of course, has played, I think, a couple of times during the course of it.
But no, it's not for. I mean, part of it was I sort of wrote it up, and I wasn't 100% happy with it. And there were a few other features and shows, obviously, that I skipped over, but. That was really a case where it hit the cutting room floor. That's what it was. Yeah.
Well, I'll look forward to whatever the revised version of that chapter is going to be, perhaps a book unto itself. I'm curious, I think it would be a shame not to talk a little bit about He Said, She Said, which one was obviously co-directed with your now wife, Marissa Silver, who's also a wonderful novelist and short story writer. She's abandoned ship on her career as a director, but has now has a immensely successful career in literature. But it was written by a longtime friend of yours, going back to high school, Brian Holfeld. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project?
Well, sure. Brian and I have known each other since we were freshmen at SLU, and I'm happy to say we've only actually worked on one film that got made. We've worked on several projects that have yet to get made. But that was really a case where what inspired the film was Marissa and I were at dinner with an acquaintance who asked how we met, and we proceeded to tell these wildly divergent stories. It was like it hadn't even been that long, but we either misremembered all the details, or if Marissa were here, she'd say she remembers it correctly, and I just made a lot of stuff up. But we decided to try and take that and develop it into a story, not only about a couple with conflicting memories or views about various things, but also a film that would allow us to have contrasting directorial points of view. And we enlisted Brian. We wanted one person in the screenwriting department as opposed to two, and we enlisted Brian, who again, sort of, I think, fashioned such a kind of a wonderful film that's both structurally and emotionally just very emotionally it's just sort of so truthful and spot on, and structurally it's just so nifty. Nifty is the right word. It's really cool.
I made my very tiny contribution to He Said, She Said when Brian called me up and asked me about Little Dorrit. He had not seen it and wanted to know whether or not that would be a film that it'd be worthwhile checking out as he developed the screenplay. And I said, absolutely.
Right.
If you haven't seen that out in the audience, Little Dorrit, if you can find it, is well worth your time. And it's a lot of time. All right, I think at this point, we might be at the stage where we want to open things up to audience questions. Is that right, Shane?
Sure. Oh, sorry. A little frog in my throat. So we do have quite a few audience questions. My first, thank you for talking so much about Follow That Bird, because I love and still love that movie. Like I have seen it as recently as probably 2 years ago. I think was the last time I watched it. I think I have watched that film like probably at least 100 times. Like I love that film. So yeah, very excited to hear you talk about that. So we have a lot of questions. The first one is going to be from Gail. And Gail knew you from Northwestern's A&O Film Board, and she is very excited to read the book. And her question is, what have you learned from your greatest critical failures?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Well, what I will say, and this is, I'm going to just give you a little teaser about a teaser of a chapter in the book. There's an entire chapter devoted to reviews and reviewers. And all I can say is that I have been on a 20+ year review-free diet when it comes to my own work. And as with all self-imposed health regimes, occasionally, I fall off the wagon. But for the past 20+ years, I have not read any review of anything of my own, and that will include this book. So the only way I'm going to answer, Gail, though, by saying one of the things I hope the book, there is like a major theme in the book. And for instance, if I were able to talk to my 25 or 22-year-old self, I think the one thing I would really encourage my young self to do is to figure out a way to measure success on your own terms in show business rather than rely on the business to define you. And I can say, in my experience, what that means. What that means is, well, you can't control the outcome of anything. I mean, this applies to so many aspects of life, but you can't control how many people buy a ticket to your movie. You can't control whether people tune into the show. You certainly can't control what the critics are going to do. The only thing you can control is the process of making the thing. And as I have found over the years, that the more process-oriented you become, the easier it is to weather like crazy ups and downs in this career, whether it's weathering a blistering review, or in my case, I won't read it, or a project going off the rails, days before it's about to start shooting. The key is to, if you are focused on process, and you will, I think, ultimately, that's your measure of success, is how well you're improving the process from job to job. You'll be a much saner person. I'm not advertising it. I'm not saying I'm that sane, but you will be saner.
If I can jump in briefly, that's a terrific chapter as far as your talk about criticism and the fact that you admit that as a youngster you actually had the bizarre notion that you wanted yourself to become a film critic.
I don't even know what came over me. I was in the 3rd grade, and a teacher asked everyone to stand up and say what they wanted to be. And the boy next to me stood up and said, "I'm going to play outfield for the Cardinals." And I stood up and said, "I'm going to be a film critic." And I just remember, everyone, like all these blank faces. I don't think anyone had any idea what the hell I was talking about. And I'm still not sure what came over me, but I was a little precocious in that regard. So.
And I will add that as a longtime critic, don't do it so much anymore, that criticism shouldn't be written for the director. And I don't think you're going to glean anything of value from it, chances are. Although long form criticism, where you're tackling a film and unpacking its meaning, may actually be somewhat illuminating even to the director after the fact. not telling you what you did right or wrong, but perhaps showing you things that perhaps you didn't even expect you did and you managed to accomplish. But criticism, I think, is probably wisely not read by the filmmaker.
And again, just Gail, I would just jump right to that chapter. It's the third last chapter in the book. It's very personal. The whole book's personal, but that one's particularly so.
And some of my favorite films are things that have not been very favorably reviewed by critics. So it's all in the eye of the beholder. So. Nicole has a few questions. The one that we are both very curious about is, who was the Scranton Strangler?
Oh, you know, I'm gonna plead ignorant on that one, only partly because I didn't direct those storylines, but I can certainly speak to some other arcane office, issues. So.
Yeah. So another question from Nicole is, what was it like working with actors such as Blake Lively, Jenna Fisher, Steve Carell, Jennifer Aniston, and Alexis Bledel? Big fan of The Office, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and He's Just Not That Into You. And maybe you don't have to specifically say if any of them were like bad to work with, but
no. All the people that you just mentioned were wonderful, and Blake and Alexis and America and Amber. I adore them. And I'll just say one interesting thing about working with those four actors when we did Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. They did not know each other before rehearsals began, and we had so little rehearsal time that and that often happens. And I had to figure out how, in a very short amount of time, to kind of create the illusion that these four have been best friends for their whole lives, and they were new to each other. So I developed some interesting exercises, and I'll just mention one of them to you during the rehearsal process. There was a thrift store in town, and I gave the four of them an allowance. I think it was maybe $100. And I said the four of them had to go to this thrift store and buy something for themselves in character. And more importantly, they had to advise their fellow actors in character. And they spent the whole day basically on a shopping expedition, but it was really a character research expedition. And I did a couple other exercises like that, but it's amazing how very quickly they formed this incredibly tight bond. And it's tricky if you know the film. There's actually not so much of the story featuring all four together. A lot of the film is the four characters on their separate summer adventures. But the most important thing was for the audience to feel like these four had this unshakable friendship from childhood. So,
Ken, that question actually raises another interesting question that you address in the book, and that is the importance of understanding actors and acting, which you say you were sort of woefully unprepared for as a director when you first entered. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to how film schools operate these days, but I went to two, good universities with good film departments, and at no point during either my undergraduate years or my graduate years was I required to take an acting class. So when I left and got my first job, I didn't know the first thing about how to talk to actors. I mean, I directed them, but I really didn't know how to talk to actors, and it's something I had to learn on my feet. And I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is that people feel that I am a good actor's director. I still feel like I'm learning it, but I feel like what I do, and this is a longer discussion, but I do feel like I know how to create an atmosphere in which people feel safe and safe and able to go out on a limb, able to play. So,
as an actor, I think that it's very I had to take a class on directing, and I felt like it was really enlightening to see that other side of it. So I appreciate that was part of my education, but I can.
Oh, yeah. I've given over the course of my career, I've given actors some of the most confounding notes, and I've just learned the hard way how to come up with playable notes for actors.
Different Nicole asks, what talent, DP, actor, editor, writer, etc., would you love to work with if given the chance?
Oh my gosh, what talent! Wow. You know what? I'm gonna think about that while I answer another question. I'm gonna use my auxiliary brain. I got
I'm going to put everything on pause. All right, so the question from David is, do you have a reaction you would care to share about The Other Side of the Wind?
Oh, I have not seen it yet. Oh, actually, have I? No, I haven't seen the film yet. Although I will say that I hope you get a chance to read the book because I go into great detail about other films of Orson Welles's, and in particular, there's a lot of focus on the Magnificent Ambersons in the book. So if you are a Wells person, please, you'll enjoy the book.
I'll echo that. It's a really terrific discussion of one scene and how it's shot.
Yeah. So, but I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen the restored Other Side of the Wind. I'll get to it though.
Question from Michael. Hello from your Cincinnati family. Could you talk about directing the difficult actor?
Well, I would say that here's the thing about, I mean, there's a lot of difficult people you have to deal with on a set. And I feel like, you know, with actors, here's what I'll say. Actors, very good actors, are able to kind of bring the emotional life of a character, bring you know, kind of get the emotional, you know, life right. You know, but I'm stumbling through this answer, so let me back up and say it again. I feel like a good actor can really bring a character's inner life, you know, to life. But oftentimes those same actors have a hard time expressing their own emotions. And sometimes, for, you know, as good as they are at sort of bringing character to life, they sometimes can't actually express their own feelings very well. So, you know, I would say that sometimes the best thing to do with a complicated, I'll say complicated rather than difficult. I don't like to say difficult. I'm not judgmental about any actor. And complicated actor is you just have to be prepared to be a good listener and be prepared when they need to kind of unload whatever it is that's bothering them. You just have to not take it personally. You just have to, you know, you have to let them say what they have to say, and at a certain point sort of kind of parse what it is that's really bugging them. That this is a question that I could go on for about 90 minutes on, but I think I'll leave it at that.
And there is a portion of the book in which you don't deal specifically with actors, but dealing with very difficult people and how you strategies for maneuvering around them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that again, going back to what you said at the beginning, Cliff, I think that there's a lot you can glean about leadership qualities from the directing process. And for me, one of it is how do you get a group of people who all have different agendas on the same page. And it's particularly complicated when a few of those people are just by nature difficult. They'll be difficult at the grocery store. You know, it's not about you. I mean, they'll be, you know, the person who at the stoplight when the light turns green and they honk 1 millisecond after the light turns green to get the car in front of them to go. I mean, you know, they're going to be that way whether they're on a set or not. So I do talk in detail about how to wrangle. So,
have you had an experience where you've had a very dedicated method actor working with a primary cast of non-method actors? Because in my head, I feel like that would just be a difficult thing to manage in a situation as a director.
Well, not necessarily, you know, method versus non-method, but I mean, I think that there's so many times I've directed scenes with actors who just have different styles. And I'll just mention one because I talk about it in some detail in the book. In the film, He's Just Not That Into You, that sort of, it's in a big ensemble film and a wonderful array of talent, but everybody has like different strengths and different approaches. And the central couple played by Justin Long and Jennifer Goodwin, we didn't get a lot of chance to rehearse. Well, when we finally started shooting, you know, Jenny Goodwin is this classically trained actor. And her screenplay was, everything was color coded. Her motivations were written in the margins. Her character arc was, it was like a beautiful document. And Justin Long, on the other hand, was a total improviser, and he just went. He I don't think he looked at the script at the beginning. He just wanted to kind of like do these kind of off the cuff lines. So when we first started to work together, it was not good because she would do her scripted line and he'd respond with an improvised line, and pretty soon nothing made any sense. So I won't go into detail how I did it, but I had to kind of get them to be on the same page, and part of it was saying to Justin, before we improvise, let's at least trust the script and see what we can find in it before we decide to, diverge from it. So
I saw that film at the Moolah, and very sad to see that place go.
Yeah.
Jane asks, which soundtrack to one of your films is your favorite and why?
Oh my gosh. I feel very blessed to have worked with some beautiful composers. Miles Goodman, the late Miles Goodman, who wrote Dunstan Checks In. Dunstan Checks In has this wonderful effervescent score. You should just, if you haven't seen the film, just watch the title sequence. It's just, and hear the title music. I had the pleasure of working with the legendary Van Dyke Parks on Follow That Bird. That score is wonderful. But I would say Sisterhood's probably my favorite. And I think Sisterhood, that was written by Cliff Eidelman, and is actually the score of Sisterhood actually is a focus of a chapter in the book. And specifically, I won't go into tons of detail, but the one thing that worried me about Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants was, that the script is very honest and emotional, and the four characters, just their stories were so relatable. But what ties them together, pardon the pun, is magical pants, a pair of pants that fits four different people. And I remember that, it was like, okay, this was the one thing in the film that made me nervous. Was it going to seem like some strange bubblegummy movie because of this, the conceit being a pair of magical pants? And Cliff, my composer, insisted that the pants should have a theme. And I thought, oh, why don't, it just made me it made me so anxious to think about kind of advertising, in case you forgot, this is a movie about magical pants. But what happened though is, in the course of discussing what a possible theme could be for a pair of pants, we came to a great discovery. And what I did is Cliff Eidelman would grill me about the pants. He goes, "Are they magical?" And I go, "No." Are they? Is there a spiritual quality? And I go, "No, I don't think." And finally, he said, "Well, is it like fate? Do they represent fate?" And I thought, "Oh yeah, well that's a great word. It has a little bit of gravitas." And I love and we suddenly came up with a theme together that we called the fate theme, which is, I think, one of the great cues in the film. And once I'm going on and on about this, but it's very important. Once we settled on the theme itself, Cliff said we should also give the pants an actual voice, and he pitched the idea of having a female a vocal line embedded in the theme. So again, it's a theme that recurs at various points throughout the film, and I'm super proud of it. So I wish I could play it. I wish I had a tape of it. I'd play it.
And I could maybe do something technological, but I would probably fail. So, so Nicole has another question. This is going back to the original Nicole, not the second Nicole. I also really liked this answer and thought that it was just like imagining them doing this was great. So Nicole wants to know, are there any other memories you have of interesting activities you've given actors to help them get in touch with their characters, like going to a thrift store?
Yeah, I'm sure I have a lot of them. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, I think that this is sort of a slightly different story, but I've told this story before, and if you're a fan of The Office, you may have heard it. But there was a lot of anxiousness on the part of John Krasinski and Jenna Fisher leading up to their big kiss, their first kiss, in the episode Casino Night. And one of the things I tried to do, I did two separate things. One is before we shot the scene in which John Krasinski enters the bullpen and kisses Jenna, is I told them I didn't want them to talk to each other. I said, you guys, I don't want you to be near each other for a while. And I think it actually created, maybe you'll think this is a trick. I don't know what you think, Shane, but as an actor, but I just wanted to kind of isolate them from one another because I felt like it would kind of just create a sense of added anxiety and added nervousness. And as opposed to, okay, okay, Jenna, let's do this scene. Like they literally didn't see each other for a couple of hours before the scene. And at the same time, this is like a flip of that, is as actors, they were so concerned about it working that I downplayed the scene. Throughout the day, we shot the scene at the end of a shooting day, and I say, oh yeah, and we got to do that kiss later, because I didn't want to give it any importance. It was just another scene. Oh yeah, once we do that, then we're going to do that kiss. So
I think you will not be shocked to know that there are a lot of fans of The Office in St. Louis, and in the rest of the country too. So, but Jenna Fischer is incredible. We've hosted her.
Oh wait, can I? Okay,
yeah.
So quick Jenna shout out. So when I auditioned Jenna for the pilot of The Office, I remember we were doing a scene, and I remember I just had this. I thought, God, she has such a Catholic girl vibe to me. And I thought she really reminds me, and this is the truth. I said she really reminds me of girls that I knew at Naring's. And that's where she went. I did that literally the weirdest. I didn't know she was from St. Louis. I didn't know anything. I just thought she really reminds me of some Naring's girls I knew. So
interesting. Yeah. I mean, she talks a lot about The Office in her book, The Actor's Life, and Actor's Life.
Oh, yeah.
So I bet there's a lot of parallels if you read those two books together.
Yeah, I don't know if she tells the story, but here's my memory of the audition when we were doing callbacks. We had the PAM finalists. Actually, it wasn't callbacks. It was earlier in the audition process. But I remember Jenna was there with the other actors, but she was sort of sitting off by herself and very quiet, and not, everybody else was very chatty, but she was kind of off alone. And she didn't seem like, everybody was so bubbly and she was so quiet. And I thought maybe she's not an actor. Maybe she really thinks she's here to get a receptionist job. But that was her plan. That was what she said. She wanted to, weirdly enough, just be as unassuming as possible because she knew the role required. Nothing showy, nothing acty. She even said to me that she wanted to kind of be as boring as possible. So.
I don't remember if she talks about that in her book, but that sounds like her. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for producing the content that you have produced over your career, producing the book, which I will put up the banner saying that there are signed copies available at left-bank.com. There's a link in the comments about how to get the book. So please do, if you're going to get the book, which you should, get the book from Left Bank Books because we have signed copies, which will be great gifts for the holidays as well.
If I can put in one quick plug, and that is Ken is going to be doing a masterclass during the St. Louis International Film Festival. That'll be taking place on Saturday, November 14th at 1 p.m. It's entirely free. The website for the St. Louis International Film Festival will be up, we hope, as early as Tuesday of next week. So check and sign up early. You'll get a lot out of it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And for the audience watching, thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and we will see you again soon.
Bye-bye.